discuss timpani with regards to senior high audition etudes set number 4. Please remember that as an auditionee, one of your first responsibilities is to walk into the room and adjust the timpani to what is comfortable to you. So I've set these drums up so I know that without having to look at the drums that I'm going to be in my proper playing areas or the areas that I need. So all of my muscle memory that I've practiced is the same. There are 3 items we're going to discuss. First is the transition getting into rehearsal 8 from measures 5 into 7. We're going to discuss measures 7 through 10 and the melody versus accompaniment. And then lastly is measure 12 where we're working on dampening. First item we'll discuss is going from measure 5 into 7. If you're counting, your primary notes will be 1 and 1 and 1, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the 8th note remains constant, and you're setting up the 6/8 fill in measure 5 and 6. The next part is tricky in measure 7, 8, and 9. There's some very fast strokes required by the right hand. And I tried to keep my hand in one position, and I used kind of a windshield wiper motion. To help facilitate that. The melody should come out very clear if you're using the proper playing areas for the right hand, or your traditional playing areas, rather, and using the center of the head for the left hand. You may want to use sticky note to place in the center of the head to really work on that playing area and make sure that you're achieving a consistent spot. Last is dampening at measure 12. What I wanted to work on here is to work on the facility of simultaneously playing and dampening a drum. So slowly, this passage will be. So on the second beat, I will have 2 and I will dampen the G and the rest. And then from the and to 4, I will have and, 4, and. And that's the goal for the dampening in measure 12. Next is the senior high audition etude set 4 snare drum. I have 3 things to discuss in this. First is roll notation. There are 2 ways we're delineating between the open stroke rolls, your rudimental roll, if you will, and your multiple balance or orchestral roll. Your open rolls are delineated by the double stroke slashes that we refer to, like in the first 3 beats of measure 42. And your multiple balance or orchestral roll is you will see in the 3rd measure of G, and you will see a Z above it. With modern notation, for example, I wrote all of these etudes in Sibelius. That modern notation is that Z is going to delineate a multiple balance or your concert buzz roll. The next thing is the drag figure that we see in the 3rd measure of F, and this is measure 49. These drag figures can sometimes get confusing for percussionists. One of the main things to work on is that actually placing them in a rhythm. So no matter what tempo that you're practicing the tempo, the etude rather, that the rhythm will be consistent. So in this measure, going from F2 to F3, or 48 to 49 respectively, it's that those 3 grace notes leading into measure 49, I'm going to put on the and of 3. So if we start at F and we play this slow, I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1. So they will be in a precise rhythm. Again, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that way they always land in the same spot. The last example in set 4 for the senior high audition etudes in snare drum is the second measure of rehearsal G. This is measure 57. And we will see these quite often in orchestral and wind band repertoire. And these are open 7-stroke rolls. And as we talked about with the 4-stroke drag figure, I'm going to place these in a rhythm. So at G, we're here at this tempo. Cha, 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 cha. So I'm thinking triple that 1, E end of 1, E end of 3. So let me play it for you. Again. And you'll notice that I'm crescendoing the grace note figures to the primary accented half note in the second measure of G. In my mind, I'm thinking of lifting the last 2 notes. So I'm thinking this, if I were using numbers as a relative dynamic system, I would have 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2. So they crescendo to the accented note, but it does have direction, and that musically it makes sense that it has forward momentum. Next is the senior high audition etudes set number 4. This is rehearsal H, and this is all with your standard triangle. We're going to discuss a few things with this. One is ornaments such as flam type figures, 1 grace note to a primary note, as well as drag type figures where you have 2 or more grace notes to a primary note. As well, we'll discuss rolls and when to use multiple clips and when not to. When I wrote this etude in mind, I wanted the performer to really spend some time with the instrument. So one of the things is that beat 4 in the very first measure, this is measure 64, is you encounter a flam. I'll turn around so you can see. And I'm not using my wrist, I'm kind of using my arm. So the grace down here, primary note. For the drag type figures with 2 grace notes and a primary note, such an example is measure 68. Simply going back and forth between the sides. Such an example is measure 68. So in my mind, I'm thinking and then the prep motion for that 16th note actually plays the 2 grace notes for me. Next is your crescendo roll. This is going to be primarily a playing area example. So for the beginning of the roll in measure 67, I'm going to start at the very edge and then crescendo more towards the center. If I were doing a day crescendo, you can bring it back accordingly. Please remember to use the natural inflections of the instruments. Typically, if I play straight on, I'm going to have a more direct sound. If I play at an angle, like so the more direct sound, I'm talking about playing flat on, at an angle, you can hear the color, direct. So I may choose to start the roll flat like this, and as it gets louder, to angle my stroke a little bit to help all the overtones be present and give the crescendo a little more nuance. You may decide that you may not be able to facilitate all of these musical nuances with one beater, such as grace notes, such as multiple grace notes, such as a crescendo roll with just one beater, and you may choose to play with 2 beaters, much like a snare drum passage. What I suggest you do is you get a secondary clip. I'm very fortunate to have these Black Swamp percussion clips here today, and you can simply mount them. I've got a pearl table today and that I can mount them, and then I could use my 2 beaters to play accordingly. I will use the same thought process as far as where I'm striking the instrument, how I manipulate the beaters, but simply I'm going to make it just a little bit easier for myself by using both beaters to play these passages.